Hello and welcome to this Insight session with Darren Coleman, and sorry for the delay. My name is Hannah. I'm with Epicom by SCM. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an intro and then I will pass you on to Darren for the actual webinar session. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. As attendees, you're automatically muted, meaning we can neither see nor hear you. You can, however, use the chat box to write in any questions you might have. And towards the end of the session with Darren, we'll try to answer as many questions as we possibly can. It is also possible for me to unmute you if you would like to say your question out loud. To make yourself noticed, please raise your hand by clicking on the respective button. So I will now hand you over to Darren. I'll turn off my camera and I hope you enjoy the session. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, throwing a baby out with the bathwater is never a nice thing to do, and you're probably thinking that's a little bit of a strange topic in the context of internal communications and technology. Well, the reason being a regrettable number of organizations dive headfirst into using technology and actually forget about the human element. In other words, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. So what I want to do today is provide you with some practical advice on how you can get internal communications with technology right by adding a human element to it. So my name is Darren Coleman. I'm the founder and managing consultant of UK-based branding agency Wavelength Marketing. We specialize in helping services brands drive growth and retain relevance through brand experiences. So because we work with services brands, a lot of our work entails internal communications and dealing with HR departments. So we work with organizations across the Europe, the Middle East and Southeast Asia, and they're all particularly interested in our ability to help them engage with employees as part of growth and retaining relevance through brand experiences. But time and time again, we see with organizations around the globe, they tend to focus too much on the technology and forget the behavioral human element. And that's what I want to try and cover off today. So this talk is intended to help you in a couple of ways. First, I want to provide some advice on how you can keep digital in context when considering internal communications. So it's about finding a balance between technology and human nature. In terms of human nature, I want to focus on the importance of feelings, stories, humor, and the importance for humans to have a sense of belonging. So in many ways, we're going back to basics with regards to human behavior here. I also want you to have some clear action points that will help you deliver a more balanced approach to internal communications. And ultimately, I want you to keep the baby in the bathwater. So the context. In terms of COVID-19, the urgency and importance and speed with which organizations are looking to embrace digital transformation has accelerated rapidly. And we can see from this Boston Consulting Group research that across all industries, approximately 83% of respondents felt that digital transformation was becoming more urgent. But that plays out across a variety of B2B, B2C, public and private sectors. But when we dig deeper into the data, we can see here on the right-hand side of the chart that only about 30% of digital transformation projects deliver in terms of value and meeting or exceeding expectations. That's a small number in the context of the size of the investment and time that's required to deliver digital transformation. So here, McKinsey from some research found 70% of change programs fail to achieve their goals, largely due to employee resistance and a lack of management support. So in other words, a key and frequently missing part of the puzzle is considering the human component when it comes to technology, change, and digital transformation projects. So it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So what I mean by this is when it comes to using technology, don't forget or overlook the importance of the human element. And this is particularly important in services brands, B2B brands, and B2B services brands, where the behavioral element of delivering experiences comes into far sharper focus. So it's important to find balance. We've seen this time and time again, that clients dive headfirst into digital transformation projects. And the behavioral element, the human element, the employee element of what they're doing is almost an afterthought. It sounds incredible, but it's true. We see it time and time again. So what I want to move on to now is talk about how you can have some balance when it comes to internal communications, technology, and possibly digital transformation projects that you may be involved with. So first, I want to talk about the importance of employees' feelings when it comes to technology and digital transformation projects. So this is important because human choice is primarily driven by the emotions we feel. And this has been borne out for centuries over research from ancient Chinese philosophers such as Confucius and Mingzu, the influential work of semantic markers, and also Daniel Kahneman from Thinking Fast and Slow. Also David Early with predictably irrational. The idea being here that the emotions that humans feel are the primary drivers of choice. So this ties in with the affect heuristic. And when it comes to using technology or engaging with digital transformation projects that internal communications may be a part of, people will be thinking, how do I feel about that? So what you need to be doing as a part of these projects is to get communications out to your employees so it encourages and it fosters and engenders the feelings that you want to promote. So maybe you want people to feel secure, not threatened. You want them to feel excited and optimistic about the new opportunities that this technology will bring them personally and their organization. So these are the types of feelings that you may want to engender through internal communications. But it's important that you don't overlook the importance of the emotion that your employees feel when they're thinking about technology and digital transformation projects. So why is the emotion that we feel so important? Well, there's an important part in our brain. It's the oldest, the most developed part of our brain, and it's called the limbic system. And the limbic system deals with a variety of neurological functions, including emotions and feelings. And this is important because when we make a decision, the front of our brain accesses our memory. And on the way to accessing our memory, we send electrical impulses from the limbic system. And what this means, it's not the memory that influences choice, it's the feeling associated with the memory that influences our choice and subsequent behavior. So if I'm feeling uncomfortable, reluctant to engage with this change in this technology, that's how I'm going to feel. And I'm going to back off and not engage with the communications and the wider project. But if I feel excited and optimistic and positive, well, that's how I'm going to feel, and that's going to ultimately influence the emotion that compels my behavior. So it's important that your understanding of how employees feel about technology and digital transformation is crystal clear from day one, and that you're also clear about how you want them to feel and use internal communications to generate that feeling. So now I'd like to show a short video to illustrate the importance of why emotions make memory stick. So Hannah, if you could play that video, please.
Yes, in fact, I will post the link to the video into the chat so you can all go and watch the video. All right.
So maybe if you can let me know when the video will have finished, Hannah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cognitive neuroscientists have studied why this.
Okay. Should be done. Maybe we'll wait 2 more seconds and then you can go on with your presentation. By the way, the participants are not able to see your slides, unfortunately.
That's unfortunate.
Yes.
It should be showing.
Would you be willing to provide your presentation for the participants afterwards, maybe?
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful.
Okay, Hannah, shall we continue?
Yes, please.
Right. And then, yeah, apologies if you can't see the slides. We're not sure what's happened there. So the next slide, what I want to do is talk about a diversity and inclusion talk on internal communications that I heard from Zalando. A lady from Zalando spoke about it. And it talked about the importance of empathy and empowerment and a culture where people could feel comfortable. And if you think about how that would make people feel, it would make them feel welcome and comfortable and accepted. And they're very powerful emotions. So that's an example of how an organization generated an emotional response through internal communications. So my question here for you, this is an action point, is how do you want your team or colleagues to feel when they receive internal communications digitally? So maybe you could type something in the response. How do you want your team or colleagues to feel when they receive internal communications digitally? And Hannah, if you could relay any of those to me, that would be great.
Yes. Okay, so I'll just read out some of the responses. So recognized, inspired, seen, motivated,
Yeah.
hashtag positive, hashtag energy, hashtag one team feeling, hashtag engagement.
Cool. Yeah.
Considered.
Considered, yeah, that sounds like a nice one. So the point here is that you need to be clear how you want people to feel before you start using technology, because quite frequently it's a bit like the tail is wagging the dog and the technology is leading the process. From the outset, you need to be crystal clear how you want people to feel about the communications that you are conveying, and then use technology in a way that will enable you to do that. So a lot of the time, brands get it the wrong way around. They focus on the technology and forget the human feeling. The point is, be clear about how you want your employees to feel as a part of that project and how they engage with you in that communications, and then use technology to support and foster that feeling. Yep, some nice examples there. So the next point that I want to talk about is the importance of stories. Now, stories are deeply ingrained in human psyche. If you think about ancient civilizations, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Mayans, the Incas, they all told stories. As kids, bedtime stories, we're used to stories. Even when we're sleeping and dreaming, we've got stories going through our minds. So the important point here is that stories are deeply ingrained in the human psyche, so you should use that to your advantage when engaging with internal communications by using technology, or in the context of a technology-driven project such as digital transformation. So the next video I'd like to show you is about neural coupling. And this shows how when we tell stories, you deeply engage and synchronize with the mind, the brain of the person that's telling you that story. So Hannah, if you could kindly share that video, please.
Yes. So the link is in your chat.
Hannah, do you have a copy of my slides?
Sorry?
Do you have a copy of my slides? I'm thinking if we can see your screen, then at least the participants and I can talk through those.
Right, I don't have a copy of your slides actually, but maybe you could email them to me and then I can show
I
them
think
on
we're going
screen.
to keep going. So the video there on neural coupling shows how stories enable us to lock into someone's brain and feel what they feel and experience what they feel. So it makes something far more real and vivid. And that's another reason why stories are so powerful when it comes to internal communications. And this is an example of how Nationwide, a building society, used stories. So what they did is they called on quite an iconic figure from the past called Arthur Webb. And Arthur Webb was a bit of a legend at Nationwide, given the role that he played in the business during particular difficult times. And he was a man who made things happen. And he set up the Challenge Cup. And what Nationwide did is they drew on the heritage and history and the story of Arthur Webb, and they got inspiration from what Arthur Webb did during difficult times to help Nationwide as a business and in the community. And they used Arthur Webb and the stories that were associated with Arthur Webb to inspire the employees at Nationwide. So if you've got a business that's got a rich heritage and culture, my advice would be to try and draw on that heritage and culture, but also use stories to inspire your employees as part of the communication, and then use the technology to convey those stories. So an action point here is to have a think about how you can use digital technology to share stories that will engage and inspire your team. So maybe through intranets, maybe through screens within the business as people are walking in, maybe desktop savers, things like that, mobile devices, sending videos out to people, small snippets through SMS. So you can create stories through digital in a variety of ways that are far more immersive and engaging. But don't be guided by the technology. Think about the story first, and then see how you can use technology to deliver that story. I want to talk about the importance of humour. And we had a quiz question here, Hannah. Is it possible to share that with the participants, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So the question is, when was the last time you laughed with work colleagues? I don't mean just a little giggle. I mean, really had a loud laugh, something that really tickled you. At some point yesterday, at some point within the last week, within the last month, or are you joking? I never laugh at work.
Okay, about 60% of the participants have voted. We'll wait another couple seconds.
Please tell me they had a laugh at some point yesterday.
Yes, absolutely.
They did. Oh, great.
Sorry, I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to show the results. So 33% had a laugh at some point yesterday, another 33% at some point within the last week, 25% at some point within the last month, And 8%, are you joking? I never laugh at work.
Okay, well, the good news is that a third of you had a laugh at some point yesterday, and maybe not such good news is, well, it's been a while since you've had a laugh. So I want to try and explain now the importance of emotion. And this is particularly important during times of COVID-19 because it's been a pretty horrid year for most people, to be fair. And I'm not sure whether you're familiar here, but we've got a guy called Sergeant Tom here, Captain Tom, sorry. And he's become a bit of a legend here in the UK because he walked 100 miles to raise money for the NHS. And the last point of counting, it was in excess of, I think, 30 or 35 million. And the one morning I woke up and he was interviewed on the radio, and he said, the sun will shine on you again and the clouds will go away. And it really stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, yeah, it's bad, but the clouds will go away. So we need to remain optimistic. And it almost feels like now we're coming to the end of the year and we just need to try and have a bit of a release and some relief. And that's where humor can come into play. So humor is important because it releases endorphins, the body's feel-good chemical, but it moderates stress and depression. And we're all painfully aware of the psychological, emotional, and physiological challenges and pressures that COVID-19 has presented for all of us. But humor reduces anxiety, it's calming, it can enhance self-esteem, but it also aids memory. And this is why the clever advertising industry people try and weave a bit of humor into the fabric of advertisements. So there are deep psychological reasons as to why humor can play an important role in internal communications. And this is an example of Willis Innovation Challenge. Now, Willis is a global risk advisory firm, so you wouldn't associate them with being comedians, but they've got a fairly light-hearted culture in many ways. And what they did is they used Rodin's The Thinker sculpture to try and get across some ideas about thinking innovatively in a slightly more fun and light-hearted and quirky way. So you can see, you know, the sweatband, the glasses, an aeroplane, paper aeroplane. So they weren't at the extreme end of trying to be humorous, but they used humor in a fairly light-hearted, light-touched way that felt right for their brand. So my question, or the action point here, is how can you use humor in ways that engages your team and colleagues? So have a think about how you can use humor to engage them. It will be time well spent to bring a smile to their face. So the final element that I'd like to look at is the importance of belonging in a human connection. And this is quite frequently overlooked when it comes to technology and digital transformation projects. So belonging is deeply ingrained in human psychology and biology. If you think of evolution, and we've got like herding mentality, we stick together for safety and survival. Even as a form of punishment, you have social isolation for kids or even prisoners. So humans, for the most part, are drawn together to have a sense of belonging. And we see this with communities for skaters and surfers and groups like that. So at a deeper psychological level, belonging causes happiness. It buffers against stress. It's protective against depression, but it also releases oxytocin. Now, oxytocin promotes feelings of love and bonding and well-being. And it's the bonding that's the particularly important part because it brings people together. And at the moment, a lot of people are suffering with isolation and depression through being by themselves. So being able to bring people together in a community, in a culture in your business is becoming more important now than ever. So it's important to think about how you can bring people together by using technology. Online chats, online forums, online video conference calls, things like that can play an important role. Video calls, etc., can really facilitate that sense of belonging that can have real positive benefits for your employees. But a lot of people just dive straight into technology. Let's use the tech to get the message out. But you're missing an important part of the puzzle there, that good technology engenders a sense of belonging and a collective mentality. And because employees are working remotely in a lot of industries these days, that sense of belonging is becoming more important and coming into sharper focus. So the action point here is, how can I ensure technology doesn't reduce the sense of belonging my team and colleagues feel? It's really important that people still feel, your employees still feel a part of what you're trying to achieve. So the question really now is when and how to balance tech with these characteristics of human nature that I've just talked through. Well, the secret lies in connecting these areas of stories, feelings, humor, etc., with your brand. For example, your values, your essence, your personality, and your positioning. So when it comes to humor, for example, make sure that you're using humor in a way that, for example, fits with your values. So if you are a slightly more serious professional type of business, then you may need to go easy on the humor and maybe focus on something slightly more sophisticated and subtle. If your positioning is about talking about your heritage and your history, then call on your heritage and your history through the stories. Or maybe if your heritage and history has an element of humor, show how you've used humor through the years, if not the decades. So the point is that before you dive straight into using technology, think about these characteristics and these associations of human behavior, stories, feelings, belonging, humor, etc. But also as well, before you think about those factors, stories and humor, etc., think about how they intersect with your brand. Because if all of a sudden you try and start being really humorous, but your values and your positioning and your personality aren't humorous, your employees will think you've gone crazy and they'll disconnect from the communications. So there's a step. Yeah, think about the technology, but come back to human behavior. But then how you engage with human behavior should be filtered through your brand. So I want to revisit the objectives that I set myself. So this talk will help you keep digital in context when considering internal communications. A regrettable number of organizations jump straight to the technology stage and forget human behavior. So in other words, they're throwing the poor baby out with the bathwater. Never a nice thing or a good idea. So balance technology and human behavior through thinking about employees' feelings, using stories so they can engage with your communications, using humor and belonging. And what I've endeavored to do is show how there's solid neuroscientific, biological and physiological reasons for weaving the thoughts of feelings, stories, humor and belonging into the fabric of your communications. But how you use stories, humor, belonging, and the emotion that people feel should be guided and intersect with your brand so that it doesn't feel disconnected and disjointed. So hopefully you'll keep the baby in with the bathwater because you want to be looking after your baby at this stage and going forward. So that's it. Thank you. Keep in touch. We've got some time for some questions. And the best question, I will send a soft copy of my book. I'll send a link to Hannah and gladly share that with you. So I'll open the floor for questions. Hannah?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Darren. Okay, so it's time for Q&A. If you have any questions for Darren at all, please do share them with us. So there is one question for you, Darren. One participant writes, I like the idea of using humor, especially at the moment because energy levels are a bit low after a tough year, but my company culture is quite conservative. How can I get started without pushing things too far?
Yeah. Well, I think the Willis example is relevant there. They used humor in a fairly conservative sort of way. So my first piece of advice is take it slow. Don't try to be too humorous too early. or else people will just think that you've gone crazy. And also engage with the senior management team. Make sure that they feel it's the right thing to do and that they can support what you're doing. Because if you go straight out with a slightly more humorous piece of internal communications or internal comms campaign, and the senior management are alienated from that communications, you'll do more damage than good. So my advice is take baby steps, small steps first, but in parallel engage with the senior management and C-suite to make sure they're comfortable with your approach. You know, humor needs to be treated with care.
Great, thank you. And another question. Do you have any tips for helping leaders to become better storytellers and to see the benefit of doing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. To become better storytellers, you need to understand who the story is for and empathize with that person. Because then you'll be able to craft stories that are relevant to them as opposed to being convenient for you. So quite frequently, brands will go out with a story that is as much to do with convenience and ease, and sometimes, frankly, being lazy because it's what they've used before. So do your research, understand who the story is for, understand their world and their context, and the challenges they're facing, the difficulties they're encountering, and then craft your story with them in mind. And also really try and weave some emotion into the fabric of the story. You know, powerful stories connect with us at an emotional level, and that's why you need to think about, well, how does this person or how do these people want to feel, and then use the story as a mechanism for helping them to feel that way. Mm-hmm.
All right. The participant who's asked this question writes, agree, it's hard to get my leaders to go deep, to share something they haven't before.
Yeah, a quick bit of advice there. I understand the challenge, and I can almost feel your frustration and pain. A good way to do that is via qualitative research. If you can, do video interviews, get the consent of the participants and record the videos, get their consent for using the content, and then create a collage of sound bites from the stories. So for example, if a lot of them have faced hardship and they don't want their kids to face that hardship again, in terms of saving for university, for example, maybe half a dozen or a dozen respondents or interview participants will say that thing. And if you can get those little snippets of recordings and put them into a 30-second, 1-minute video collage, you'll silence the C-suite and they will go, yep, okay, I can hear it from the customer. Because sometimes no matter what you say or do, it has to come straight from the customer or other stakeholders. So that's a tactic that we've used time and time again, and it works well. But make sure you get the consent of the participants to share the content. Good luck.
Wonderful, thank you. So there's another question actually. I'm thinking of launching an internal 2D cartoon show with characters people can relate to, writes a participant. Selling more dry topics like GDPR, security, etc. Good idea, question mark?
I'm smiling because personally I love things like that, and actually the first iteration of my book was based on a cartoon character, and I use that cartoon character as a way to convey serious branding messages in a slightly light-hearted way. I think the type of character you use needs to be relatable. So think about a character that people within your organization would identify and relate to, and then use that character. So yes, I think it's a good idea. It's fresh. It can be a fairly cost-effective way to do things. I mean, you can even get 3D animations fairly cost effectively these days. So I would say give it a go, but keep it simple and maybe err on the more conservative side. So introduce the concept of a character, use that character to introduce some ideas, not necessarily in a really serious way, but a slightly more serious way than you would initially like to do first off. Help people get used to the idea that there's this character conveying a message, and then sort of play with the character to see how far you can push it with humor. But again, use the C-suite and senior management as a soundboard. Yeah. But personally, I love things like that. But I understand when you're dealing with things like GDPR, it's not the most exciting topic in the world, to be fair. So using a character in some way could be a nice touch and a way to get people's attention. So use the character as a mechanism, and then maybe dial up the humor at a later date. So take it in steps. Good luck. And if you want to send me something, I will happily look at it for you.
Great, thank you. All right, seems like there are no more questions for you. So I'd suggest we call it a day. Thank you so much again, Darren, for this very insightful webinar session. And thank you everyone for attending. We've got 2 Insight sessions coming up at 4 p.m. Please find the respective registration links in the chat box. Thank you and enjoy the rest of our web conference.
Thank you.